how to build a high volume multi-market sales organization. Shortly after the pandemic started in 2020, I had the chance to join a post-Series A startup. Just the weekend before I joined, the Series A was approved, and that meant that we went into full-on hiring mode. And of course, during that time, it was all about top-line growth, market share, and sales. My role was to come in as sales enablement manager, which basically combined my background in project management and as a sales leader myself. And it was a perfect combination of actually building something for the sales organization using project management and using almost architecting principles. Whereas you find that many times sales is treated as a function that needs to be pushed, that needs to be pressured in order to bring results. Almost like I know a donkey that's carrying you through the mountain that only moves if you hit it. Like that's often the approach that leaders take, that founders, that CEOs take when they're dealing with their sales organizations. And I always found that very short-sighted and thought you need to look at architecting the function in such a way that it is not dependent on constant emotions, on constant pressure, on constant personal human intervention. But you want to build it in such a manner that regardless of who runs it, regardless of who is in the team, it will deliver the results that it should. And that, of course, increases your enterprise value, your transferability to a new owner, to a strategic acquirer, to a private equity firm, because now you're building something that lasts, something that is not just held together by personalities. When I started out, I had to prove myself too, and to spend my first month making sales calls myself, sitting together with the team, and also studying them, studying how people were interacting with each other, what actually worked, what didn't work, who were the top performers, who weren't, and what were the commonalities and the patterns. And many of the early conversations we had revolved around, we kind of listened to the calls of some of the top bestsellers. It seems like they're using a structure. Yes, they're using a structure. I think a structure is what makes us successful. Let's look into how that structure looks like. And I went, of course, immediately to shadowing those top performers, taking notes, analyzing their calls, and we came up with a structure, with an introduction. Like a lot of it was conversation based, phone call sales and the B2C sector, and starting with a proper introduction, starting with a needs analysis with a specific pitch, and then going into having kind of a clear method, or at least some order to the call of when we pitch something and how we pitch it, and what are like the 2-3 phrases that always work really well. And then, at the end of the call, have the next action steps, so it feels more natural, and the new customer doesn't feel like they just bought something and they don't know what's next. And once you had that structure, it was very interesting. It now became possible to actually bring people up to speed with it, to unify, to standardize what works. And you always have to be careful when you build models, when you build frameworks. If you become too rigid about them, including playbooks, whatever it is, people will naturally resist it and reject it, and I would say rightly so, if they feel it's supposed to turn them into robots, where I have to read from a script or I have to follow the step by step. I think it's a legitimate reaction to say, no, I don't want to do this. But here's the balance. It's also not really helpful to just not have any methodology and to just wing it and freestyle. And this goes to a lot of things, not just sales. But to actually have a strong foundation that becomes muscle memory through training, through workshops, through basically practicing also a lot of sales scenarios, and then being able to organically apply that to the situation that you're in. You will not every of your call will follow exactly that sequence, but by knowing the sequence, you will always have a fallback, and you have a foundational structure that you can freestyle on. And it was very interesting that a lot of the older, or let's say legacy sales agents would reject the structure, or would reject even upskilling workshops. I would say, it's not for me, I don't need this. This is just, I'm good how I am. If I now start implementing something else, that would just screw my results. And it was not until we started onboarding, where we hired new people back at that time, five people per per week. That was still considered a lot back then, but of course later on during hypergrowth it turned into 20, 30, sometimes 40 people per week across 20 different markets on multiple continents. But back then it was around 5 people per week. It was pretty manageable, small groups, and I would run the onboarding process, basically teaching them the structure that we just identified that worked, and they gave them a baseline. And it was not until those new sales agents actually outperformed most of the old sales agents that they became interested. And it also teaches you something about proof of concept. You can have the best concepts in the universe, especially also when you build a sales organization. If you want to implement certain methodology, if there's no proof, if people don't see it, they have a very easy time to reject it. It's only once they see what's in it for them that they start getting interested. The same thing happened here. Unfortunately, some of those agents were never able to catch up with the performance of the new ones. And it really proved the point that if you have a strong onboarding process, and this goes really for any company, it even goes for internal projects that you have in your company where you put people on new departments and new processes. When you have a strong onboarding process, you can take relatively inexperienced people, and they often perform better than experienced salespeople from other industry. And we repeatedly had the experience that somebody who had spent 5 to 10 years in sales completely underperformed next to somebody who was fresh out of university or came from an entirely different field and wanted to try out sales and would just stick to what they learned in the onboarding, and they would basically smash their numbers and hit the sales records. Sometimes the fastest sales within a week, or the highest revenue within 2 weeks, by somebody who has never even been in sales, but they just adopted what they learned in the onboarding without any legacy baggage. And there's a real lesson in here, especially if you're hiring salespeople from different industries, or somebody, maybe you're in B2B and you're hiring somebody who has E2C experience, or you're doing tenders, you're doing government sales, and you're bringing somebody in who has experience with B2B, medium, like small, medium enterprise market. They might have very different skills and a very different mode of operating that will not always apply fully to your situation. So if you want to have an internal onboarding and training process, you can actually shape what those sales agents are going to do based on what works in your industry and what has been proven already by your top best sellers. Once we had the onboarding under control and it became more and more of a structure, I think one thing worthwhile noting is onboarding is not just skill acquisition or skill transfer, it's also setting the tone. It shows people that I invest in you when you join this company. Like, I care enough about you to invest time, energy, and training in you. I believe in you. And that typically creates a reaction of reciprocity. Not always, but psychologically, where people say, okay, company invested in me, now I also want to invest back. Creates a different level of motivation. And the same way it sets the tone. This is a high performance environment. Like, we move at a certain speed here, and we expect certain skills, and we're not expecting something of you that you cannot do. All the resources, all the support is here. The coaching by your team leader, the training resources, the script, and there's an exchange of best practices. Right? You are being supported to deliver those results, so that the only gap between you and those results is ultimately your work ethic and not a skill gap. And throughout those onboardings, we also, of course, covered over the months, right? We had here and there some issues with some sales agents smashing the sales records, but it turned out the month after they had almost 50 to 60% of their sales being refunded, because those customers just realized that whatever they were being sold to was not what they thought it was. And this led to a situation where you really had to make a decision. Do you keep this person because on the surface they are performing, they are setting the tone in the way, they are a role model, because not everybody knows about the refunds. Their attitude is very aggressive in a good way, in a competitive way, so it inspires other people to work hard too. Do you keep that person? Or do you say, this is not acceptable, and if we keep this person, it's not only harming the reputation among the market, it's not only hurting customers, but also it starts setting a tone in the sales organization that's very harmful for the long-term success of it. And these are really the inflection points where an organization needs to choose what it stands for. Also, it needs to choose in a certain way if it's willing to stand for a certain value that then becomes the operating system because of that decision. And once that person was fired, it set a certain standard that this behavior is not acceptable. And it sent a signal to everybody else as well. In the meantime, team leaders were also catching up with the new realities. There was more and more growth coming in. The market demand came in more and more. Product market fit was more and more established. Team leaders, teams grew. Some of them still resisted the onboarding because they also felt that certain level of control was taken from them by somebody outside of their team, kind of being in control of the first 4 to 5 days of their team members. But also they realized that now the more things grew, the more the team's growing, the revenue's growing, the stakes are getting higher. They didn't always feel prepared for this. And so it leads you into something that's often also overlooked, which is team leader enablement. How do you enable your team leaders to do a great job, to not be overwhelmed? Let's face it, a lot of leaders did never receive a formal education or a formal training in leadership. There are barely any places where you can get that. Business schools typically don't. Most people don't even have a business degree. So the likelihood that they have leadership experience or leadership training for commercial contexts are near to zero. Most people are just winging it and going by trial and error. There are, of course, training programs, some effective, some less effective. Some people just collect certifications, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they know how to lead in the field under pressure, dealing with 15 other people and their emotions and their motivations, fears, dreams, and aspirations. Like, it takes something to be a leader. It's a tough job. And it showed pretty quickly that the more you scale, your leaders also struggle sometimes keeping up with this. How do you support them? Do you have somebody to coach them? Do you have resources for those leaders as well? Because you only look at the sales results, and you often overlook it is actually the leaders who drive those results. Apart from having luck in terms of having some high performers on the team, it's the leaders who set the tone. You see the leaders' performance more in the continuity and consistency of results, in the retention of employees. Are the employees maintaining a certain level very consistently, and ideally, of course, an above average level, but is there consistency? Tells you more about the leader than actually about the team members themselves. And as a company, despite all the adrenaline and all the cowboy attitudes, you want to have consistency. That pays the bills, that pays the salaries. And yes, it's tempting, wanting to see the spikes and wanting to see wanting to feel the dopamine and everything, but for a company, it is better to have consistent performance than having spikes and boom and bust cycles in the sales team every couple of weeks. Consistency shows us that our systems are working, that our processes are proper and sound, and it doesn't mean that they should always stay like this. Of course, we constantly to evolve and iterate our processes to get to even higher levels, but at least we have a foundation to work on. If your sales results look like boom and bust, that means that obviously a lot of it is held together by, it probably mirrors the emotional state of your team leader or of your high performers, these results. That's not sustainable, that's not scalable, that's not transferable, that doesn't give you enterprise value. So once we kind of moved into the first couple of months and the company was taking off, was gaining more and more success, especially on the revenue side, and then was also able to capture that on the customer success side. We started getting into expansions, onboarding employees from new countries into the sales organization, and now you're basically dealing not only with one, let's call it, with one team in one market that has 5 sub teams with different team leaders, but now you're starting to replicate the same thing with people who don't even speak a language. Of course, everyone needs to speak English, but have subcultures in your organization, especially if you're multi-market, that go completely beyond the comprehension of many management layers. Right? It's hard enough to keep up with all the numbers, to keep up with the market, to keep up with what's going on in general. But now you start seeing more and more subcultures, and you see that the core essence of what the company is actually now more and more being diluted. It's more and more being distributed, and it starts feeling a bit different. And you will now see some of your older employees who have been with the company from the beginning starting to feel a bit uncomfortable. It doesn't feel the same anymore. It doesn't feel like a family anymore. It doesn't feel that cozy anymore. The more and more people you get on board, the more and more you need to lead through structures and rules. So suddenly it's not anymore about being in good graces with the CEO in order to keep your job. Now there's actual real transparency. There are dashboards. There's performance expectations. There are other people who come in hungry, ambitious, and they might outperform you in their first week, and that doesn't look good on you. It creates a lot of discomfort. Now you have people from completely different cultures, like national cultures, who come in and bring in entirely new change to the whole mix. And during those times, we focus really and double down on the spending time on the existing sales team, making sure that, especially with quality assurance, which was the coaching part, making sure that they feel also attention is being given to them, that they are part of that growth. That was one element of it. And the other one was, once new people came in, to really from the get-go train them in such a manner that they can pick it up where the rest of the sales organization is currently at. Which basically means you want them to build up on the existing institutional knowledge. You don't want every single person who comes in new to the company or the sales team to having to figure out everything from scratch and go by trial and error, because that costs you money. Every salesperson, at least if you work with a fixed salary model, every salesperson that you have costs you money. And there's something called ramp time. You want them to bring you back money to actually create and deliver results as quickly as possible. The only way you can do this is really teach them what is already known as best practice in the company ASAP in the first week, in the first days. Hold them to that, set the tone for speed, set the tone for performance, but also pride in performance. There's a difference between leading people by fear and punishment, or actually giving people a sense of pride in performance, almost like an athletic team, and where you earn your place in that team by what you contribute, and by you're being a team player, not by drinking with people after work, but you're being a team player by actually holding your weight, by holding it up for everybody else in the team, as everybody else should do. And once we kind of moved to the first market expansions, of course, those markets also needed to prove themselves, and we were still mostly dealing with individual contributors. So like sales agents, like team leaders, very talented and skilled people, of course, who just figured things out. And it's a certain profile of people that you need to find, that you need to hire, and which leads to hiring in general. In sales, you have a very unique problem. Salespeople are uniquely skilled in telling you what you want to hear. So if you interview salespeople, they might have even researched you and your preferences. They will find a way, especially if they're good, they will find a way to make you feel comfortable as a hiring manager, as a sales leader, as somebody who's in charge of making the final decision, if this person should be part of the team, by telling you what you want to hear. If you are a person who pays a lot of attention to a track record, to a career before big brand names, they will play on that. If you're a person who is very much into empathy and sales, they will play on that. If you're a person who is all about high performance and going aggressively after, they will talk like that. Like salespeople, otherwise they wouldn't be successful. Salespeople know how to deal with others. They know how to communicate. And so what often happens is, if you rely on interviews only for hiring, you end up hiring people who were really good at interviewing, but as established before, who might not have the right skills for the particular industry you are selling in. Like if your product, if your service requires explanation, requires relationship building, maybe you are a new company, that means you don't have a strong brand name. That means you need to build even more relationships as a salesperson. You cannot just fall back on the brand name. No, you bring somebody in from a big brand name company who has been President's Club, world bestseller, and you think, oh, this person has proven success, I just bring a person in. You have to understand that person relied a lot on the brand to do the selling. And they just came in, they're probably amazing closers. They're really good at driving it from interest to close, to transaction. That's amazing. It's a really rare skill. And not many are really good at this. But if your market right now at this moment, if your company requires people to build relationships because you don't have a brand name, you're not known in the market, you need to establish trust, referrals, and so forth, then that person will A, be extremely frustrated, B, will probably not be able to make the switch, and C, will just become really impatient because the results are not showing. And I've seen this play out personally many times, and these persons become very defensive and problematic, and typically steer a lot of conflict in the teams as well, because they are frustrated that their success doesn't translate into this new environment. And we typically don't think about these things. We just think somebody's good in sales, I want them on my team. And the worst is if we already have a negative stereotype about sales. We think that all salespeople are like the Wolf of Wall Street or some other movies we watched, or the person who called us and who we didn't like. And then we say, as leaders or as hiring managers, yeah, we don't like sales, but we have to hire them because we need revenue. That's what the investors want. That's what the company needs to grow. And so we might have to hire these types of people. And they end up literally hiring their stereotypes, because that's what it feels like for them what a proper salesperson is. Sleazy, transactional, fast talking, manipulative. And they could sit in front of the salesperson with the most integrity, professionalism, and skill, and dismiss that person because it doesn't feel like a salesperson. I don't know if he's got it, because he doesn't feel like a salesperson. And so sometimes these hiring managers and leaders become victim of their own stereotypes, of their own prejudice. And they start hiring the same cartoonish figures that they resent and that they don't like. So here you gotta be very careful. One safeguard, one guardrail that I always used is case studies or role play. If it's a leader, they have to do a case study, 30, 60, 90 days. They have to research about the company. How would they lead the team? How would they build processes and so forth? If they are a sales agent and leading the team, also for the team leader, actually, it's the second round. I play a difficult customer and I put them on the spot, on the phone or in person, and they have to convince me, they have to sell to me. And I want to hear that they actually deal with me in a patient and friendly way, even though I'm giving them a very hard time. And you will find out more about the salesperson doing this role play than by doing 3 hours of interviews where they tell you what you want to hear. In a role play, you see how they react under pressure. You see if they think on their feet. You see if they're problem solvers. You see if their predisposition is to be respectful towards the customer, or if they are dismissive and disrespectful to customers because it's just in them. It's just their worldview. Customers are numbers. These are just people I can screw over to get my numbers, to get my bonus. And all of this comes out in a staged role play scenario. And it comes especially out because the people, of course, want to show themselves from the best side. So they get frustrated way more easy. And if somebody gets irritated very easy, then of course I have to be careful if I want to bring this person into my company, because once they start burning bridges with my customers or potential customers, those who, of course, then don't buy because of the negative sales experience, word spreads. That erodes my long-term success as a company. It erodes my referrals. It erodes reviews. People look at reviews before buying things. And if it's all negative, and if there's comment after comment after comment about sleazy salespeople who screw them over, there are people who will never buy from you even though they want your product. So you're eroding your long-term success if you're not careful about who you hire and who you let into your company in the first place. So sometimes, though, you're under urgency and you're under pressure. And I would say also from my personal experience, probably the worst hiring decisions you make are the ones that you make under pressure, under urgency, under time pressure. And then you often end up skipping due diligence. You skip certain steps. You want to see something in the candidate that's actually not there. And you just want the relief of being done with the stress of looking, of interviewing. You just want to get it over with. And that's typically the moment when you make the worst hiring decisions, and when you bring people in who might end up destroying your team, not even out of bad intent, but just because they try to save their own skin, and they start doing things that they shouldn't be doing, and because they were not compatible for the job, they were not the right person for the job. And I mean, who's gonna tell you this? If people come in with a compensation package with a salary, they don't want to have it on their CV, on their resume, that they left after 3 months. They just rationalize themselves. I gotta stick this through. So hiring, and this has always been a huge lesson. Hiring is something you gotta take very, very serious. And you need to have a process for it. You need to have a philosophy and operating mode around it, because otherwise you will end up with decisions that you regret, with very tough interpersonal dynamics. And at some point you will have to be anyway the person who has a one-on-one conversation with the person you hired in order to let them go. And you can spare yourself a lot of this if you're more diligent before you hire somebody. And of course, once we hired a lot of salespeople, it demanded hiring more leaders, hiring country managers, hiring heads of sales that would actually be in charge of those, because at a certain level of complexity and scale, you cannot scale it, you cannot manage it by yourself anymore. You need to have mid-level managers who take their load off you, and then you interact with those mid-level managers instead. But again, here you have the same dynamic. Depending on your hiring process, you might end up with people, especially in an early stage of a company, who have very strong will, and you need this, but also people who are a bit more on the autonomous side of things and want to do things their own way. And they have to a certain degree. Like, a lot of stuff at this stage of the company is exploratory. You need to figure out how it would work in a different market, in a different vertical, in a different industry. You do not have a playbook. You do not have a best practice. You just need to figure it out. And you need a certain personality type. You need to be a certain personality type to even take a job like this, but also to push through with this and to figure it out. And this can often be the seed of a lot of institutional inter-organizational conflict that can really haunt you over the midterm and long term, because if you do not design now the system appropriately, with guardrails, with clear responsibilities, with, especially if you're in a multi-market setup, you will end up in a constant tug of war between centralization and micromanagement, decentralization, letting go and hoping for the best, trying to rein it back in when something explodes over here, then again overreacting on that side, and it just creates a constant dynamic of frustration where the company is almost set up against itself.